right, welcome to The Future is Now, Public Safety Connected, the podcast where we explore innovations shaping how first responders communicate, coordinate, and protect our communities. I'm your host, John Paul Jones, Executive Director of the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association. So today we're talking about how maps are going indoors and how that's reshaping emergency response, school safety, and public safety resilience. Our guest from Esri will show how Indoor GIS, when paired with FirstNet, is becoming the next frontier in situational awareness. So joining me are Brooks Shannon, ENP, and that stands for?
Emergency Number Professional.
Perfect. And Director of Emergency Communication Solutions at Esri, and Mike Cox, Director of Fire and EMS Solutions at Esri. So Brooks, Mike, welcome. Let's start with quick introductions. Tell us about your roles and Esri's overall mission in public safety.
Sure thing. So my role at Esri is to really act as a liaison between our user community and our partner community and Esri ourselves to make sure that our geospatial technology and the geographic approach to understanding things is used to its greatest potential to improve public safety. And specifically for me, that's within the sphere of 911 and field-based communications, public safety broadband, land mobile radio, and that sort of stuff. I've been at Esri for just about 2 years, but I've been in the industry for 22 years, always on the vendor side. And I've worked for Esri partners that entire time, really focusing my energy on figuring out where is a 911 caller, where is a first responder, how do we get the right responder to the right location as quick as possible, and hopefully saving lives throughout that entire process. And I think Esri's role broadly, I like to say, we don't create the maps, but we provide a platform and a whole breadth of solutions that allow people to create maps, whether or not they're making the data themselves or they're pulling in data from others, synthesize that, analyze it, derive new insights, and share that with consumers. And that's, I think, what makes our place in this space extra special, and I know that Mr. Cox can share more about that as well.
Absolutely. Mike?
So I'm the Director of Fire and EMS, and as similar to Brooks, but in that fire and EMS space, do a fair amount of work around response and recovery and a lot of community risk reduction activities, and certainly a lot of coordination with FirstNet around disaster response. So our technology stack is leveraged by a FEMA response branch for things like search and rescue common operating picture. Obviously, that is well coordinated with FirstNet and connectivity in the field to provide those services after a significant disaster. And tracking personnel in the field and inside of structures is a critical component of that. And that's what we're going to discuss today.
Well, and a common theme we talk about throughout this conference, and really when we dialogue, in our relationship with public safety and with Esri, is the real-time intelligence component.
Yes.
And I know it's kind of like Esri set out to change the world, and they have, and they continue to do so. I mean, I was amazed when I was at the Cal Chiefs Tech Conference
Yes.
at Redlands, and just the atmosphere and just the feeling I got from those, working for Esri, working with Esri, it was like being a part of something greater than yourself. And so, you really got the feeling that Esri shares the mission, vision, and values of public safety. And really, I think that's what the driver is for the motivation to continue to change the world going forward, which we're excited about. So that's awesome. So let me ask you this. So Esri's ArcGIS has been a staple in public safety for years. How is your technology changing the way agencies operate?
So for me, I think within the sphere of 911 as well as field-based communications, I think it's changing the way that agencies operate because it gives them an easier way to have shared situational awareness. So you can imagine, think of it from a perspective of indoor maps. You could have an indoor map that is seen by a 911 call taker, a telecommunicator, first responders in the field, commanders, all looking at that true single pane of glass. Even if you're bringing in responders for mutual aid, you have access to all of that data. You can share all of that data very seamlessly between different public safety systems and bring a degree of geospatial location-based awareness that up until recently was hard to do in the field because of a lack of ubiquitous, high-performant broadband capability that now exists through FirstNet.
Oh, looking at what FirstNet is the backbone, and looking at the holy grail, as we've heard that come up over and over, is that common operating picture where through through your use of Esri technology, and these intersecting technologies come together. So you have that common operating picture to where X, Y, Z axis, in that real-time intelligence, where are your firefighters in theater? What are they doing? And to be able to have layers to where you can see that in building mapping, relative to those that are on scene in that real time. I tell you, it's a game changer. We're excited about the future, but Mike, as far as the common operating picture, in the work that you guys are doing there, how do you see that in the scope of need? Let's say from the incident commander standpoint, how do you see that going forward as becoming, advancing with the, everything related to like big data, the Internet of Things, streaming video, et cetera?
Yeah, certainly the increase in our capabilities through connectivity makes a big difference. It allows us to have those real-time kind of applications that provide decision support in the command post. Even on the preparedness side, being able to pull together big data sets about populations or infrastructure so we can start to plan around our response for significant incidents. It really, allows you to understand not just what's happening and where it's happening, but who is it happening to? Like, what is the community we're serving? And
Sure.
the software really provides that kind of information to the decision maker, whether it's operational preparedness or recovery.
Well, having all that come together, so having layers of information at your fingertips to stay in real time, without it being dizzying, and the way you guys organize your information is just amazing. And the way it's the useful, like digestible way in which it's presented. Like, when I was in DC at their operations center, it's with Station 16, I believe it is downtown. Yes. Well, there was a lot of Esri presence there, and it was very impressive. And
that's a perfect example of an agency leveraging technology appropriately for day-to-day ops or a type 1 incident as it occurs. And you actually have a case study here. The association has a presentation today by DC Fire and EMS. In that specific response, they managed 30 to 40 agencies through one pane of glass, right? They had one common operational picture. Right. And they could manage, mutual aid companies, state agencies, federal agencies that were responding to that event. And it really does help them, deploy their resources efficiently, prevent duplication of effort, and actually keeps their responders safer because I know where they are and where they should be and can deploy those resources appropriately.
Well, in Brooks, so when I was out at the Redlands, at Esri headquarters, it happened to be, the night of the plane crash.
Yes.
When it occurred. And you want to comment a little bit about how, I think the IT individual from DC Fire happened to be there at the time. And I think, worked with a couple others at Esri to develop that app that they ended up applying to the incident.
Yeah, that was we had 2 or 3 of the DC Fire and EMS personnel on site for that event. And we have a disaster response program, which we operate 24/7. Don't have to have any kind of software to engage us for that. We'll provide whatever you need to get through an event. So we actually, kicked off our disaster response program. We set up almost like an IMT, I'll call it, and supported them remotely from California with their personnel there with us. But that app you speak of that we spun up that night was specifically for mutual aid companies coming in where they may not have the software, they may not have the logins to get into DC's system, but they were able to share out more or less a public application that anybody could submit data as they were doing searches and evidence recovery and things like that. It was amazing the way they put it together on the fly. It was really, really impressive.
And what was impressive too is just, looking back and how useful that was throughout the entire operation. I mean, I know they were just singing the praises of Esri for helping with that. And, a lot of work went in ahead of time to where that was possible.
Exactly. Yep.
You definitely were prepared.
Yeah, get your things together on a blue sky day, right? No, don't wait till after bang. Do it before bang.
Well, you guys are a definition of that, for
Yeah.
sure. So let's get to one of the most exciting areas, indoor mapping. Brooks, what's happening here in regards to how that's expanding and looking forward?
There's a lot going on right now, and it's really, really fascinating to see it. One of the things I'm really interested in is the velocity by which we see indoor maps for K through 12 schools being created throughout the U.S. There's been a huge push. There's over 20 states that have enacted legislation already. Some have funding to back that up to go and map all of their K through 12 schools. Whether or not that's for a bad day when someone comes in and does bad things, or just your day-to-day garden variety EMS calls, right? Having that indoor map can shave a lot of time off of response and help provide the best kind of response possible. We're seeing activity now at the federal level bringing attention to this through the potential federal ELISA's Act, which
Right.
takes the state level ELISA's laws, which are really centered around panic button alerts, and brings that up to a federal conversation, which also includes the notion of having K through 12 school mapping done at a federal level. So should something like that get funded, that's going to really help impact school safety. So that's a big thing that we're focusing on right now, and looking at when maps are created for schools, how can they be created in a GIS-based way so that they're easy to update and easy to share? Because you don't want a situation where the school map ends up in a lockbox at the school on a piece of paper. So
Right.
in order to get at that map, you need to rock up to the building, get the key out, unlock the box, and pull it out. What if you can't get to that because the building is on fire, right? What if you need intelligence prior to getting on scene, right? So something built using GIS that can work well within the ArcGIS platform can be another piece of data shared on that single pane of glass between your 911 telecommunicators, your first responders, all of the agencies. But that's just a small slice of all of the kinds of buildings indoor maps could be helpful for.
Oh, yeah. And of course, the common operating picture on the fire scene at law enforcement incidents, where they need, of course, it's the real-time intelligence component that like you spoke of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's especially in schools. I mean, we're excited about what that means for public safety related to that as well. And of course, we've had incidences in schools that required high-level incident command operations and the need for real-time intelligence. So we appreciate what you're doing in that space.
Yeah, and it's interesting to explore it further past K through 12 school safety and higher education campus safety. I think back to a story that my fiance told me. She worked the night of the Pulse nightclub shooting down in Florida. She was a manager on duty, and after the gunman had taken hostages, the SWAT teams were trying to figure out how do we reach the building. Now, you don't want to blow a hole in the side of the building if there's a bathroom or some other room on the other side where the hostages might be located. That's a problem. So lacking a map of that building, that was very challenging for them to figure out where a safe place to breach the building was. Fortunately, they were able to do that and everything was fine. But you can think of plenty of other situations where having maps of buildings could be really useful in certain circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I know that in the fire and EMS space that we're looking forward to. What we've seen has already blown our minds. I mean, when I come back from Esri headquarters, I feel like I just left Area 51 or something. What's going on out there? I'm like, wow. But so we get excited about that. You guys just keep leaning in, and that's what's impressive to us. In relation to we've been talking about how FirstNet's the backbone for mission critical communications. So how does FirstNet make this indoor mapping capability truly operational?
So I would love to get your take on this, Mike, but I think from my perspective, I think back to when I didn't have gray hair, which was when I got fresh out of college and I started developing mapping applications based on Esri technology for 911 call centers and first responders out of the vehicles, right? So you had a thick client in Windows that used data on disk that was used by not only your telecommunicators up in the PSAP or the ECC, but also folks out in fire trucks and squad cars, you name it, right? So very often that map wasn't what you would consider live, right? It's as static as it was when it was delivered onto that, sort of like it's as the freshest it's ever going to be is when you drive the new car off the lot.
Sure.
Right? And what often happened is that maps in the 911 centers would get updated with a relatively frequent cadence. Maybe that's once a month. But the cars, they couldn't touch them because the fleets were so large. It took them, sometimes a year or two to update those maps. So imagine, that's one thing for outdoor maps. It's another thing entirely for indoor spaces that may change on a relatively frequent basis. Imagine a school where they roll in a portable, they knock down a wall, they put a wall up, they move the science lab from one room to another. Wouldn't it be great to take the intelligence that we have, the chemicals and the hazardous materials that are in that, and be able to annotate them and move them to a new location and have that update just like that within all of the systems that use it, including those in the field? FirstNet makes that possible because the ubiquitous connectivity and the high amount of bandwidth and the resiliency allows us to connect that data live instead of running around with thumb drives.
Well, you said resiliency, and that really strikes a chord. I remember, having a discussion yesterday about, resiliency, redundancy, that public safety grade, backbone, right? It's that's different because, it has to meet our standards, meet our needs. And I think if you think about the value and importance of this real-time data that we're talking about, I mean, it needs that type of backbone.
And
Can
that's,
you comment on it?
yeah, that's key. And one of the other focused issues we're working on is being able to track firefighters, police officers consistently inside of a structure. And we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there, I feel like. But that consistent connectivity with a decent amount of bandwidth, FirstNet, will provide that consistent tracking near real-time data. Because if you don't have that capability, a firefighter's only going to try it once or twice, and then it's like, it's no good. I can't use that. And if they can't do it consistently across the entire city, county, whatever their area of operation is, they're not going to use it anyway. I mean, if it doesn't work in this building, I'm not going to try it on another building, right? So we have to have that consistent connectivity with the bandwidth necessary to move that data with an accurate XY or XY and Z location of that firefighter and police officer.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Frankly, I mean, we've across the country, we've lost firefighters, police officers in certain situations where we really couldn't locate them at the time.
Yep.
Of course, the NIOSH reports somewhere in the first paragraph of every one of them, I think there's something about communication.
Every one of them, yeah, 100%.
But can you share how agencies are already using this combination of GIS and FirstNet in the field now?
Certainly the tracking component that I do see a lot of that, and even just simple AVL data from vehicles to be able to dispatch by location, which saves minutes at times on travel time and finding the closest appropriate resource. We're seeing it used significantly or quite often at special events where we deploy an IMT and personnel that are not doing their day-to-day work. They're assigned to a special event, and providing them devices, FirstNet devices, where we can first of all communicate consistently at a large venue with preemption, which is quite important in something like we got 100, 200,000 people at an event. And then of course know their location, because you're not dispatching by your traditional 911 PSAP process. You're operating out of that IMT kind of context, and to be able to see that location, be able to find that closest appropriate resource is critical.
Oh yeah, staying in real time. And if you think about, you mentioned preemption, but that priority and preemption, that really only exists in the true definition of it is with FirstNet. But gives that strength of confidence. That like you said, I mean, if it doesn't work. Remember the early AVL stuff where it would be shuddering and then all of a sudden it would jump and it went 10 miles.
Yeah.
Just how far we've gone.
And we still see disruptions in that kind of service, not as much, but say once the hurricane passes. I remember a couple of years ago in Florida, we had connectivity because the cows weren't up yet. FirstNet was there deploying. They'd actually pre-positioned around areas of the state. But initially, as some of the USAR resources were deploying, they were in helicopters, and the location would spike. Like they'd be all of a sudden 10 miles away for a second, and they would come back. Well, that was because of issues with connectivity. And that's being improved every day. And now, it used to be you get out after a hurricane or large wildfire or earthquake or something of that nature, and they're screaming about connectivity. Well, we're getting connectivity back based on some of the processes that are in place, in that first operational period after a hurricane. Now they're screaming about imagery and other things, but the connectivity or reestablishing that connectivity has improved greatly just in the short time I've been at Esri the last 7 or 8 years.
Well, and you were talking about that. What's interesting, and that's the beauty of the deployable assets, that standing army to bring in there in short order when these disasters happen. Because like you said, once they immediately came in, set it up, established themselves, they threw the switch, and then all the connectivity issues we talk about, were resolved. And that they were talking about that yesterday, like the recent tornadoes earlier this year in St. Louis County that they had, that hit St. Louis County, went over to St. Louis City and all that. But those deployable assets got brought to bear like that, and they were singing the praises that, just having the ability to have that real-time data, having the ability to have communications where otherwise they wouldn't, and you being able to use Esri technology, to overlay that, I mean, really, you talk about this partnership, and I will say this, I mean, it's the commitment from Esri, from day one, and when I said earlier, I meant it, it's like, they were committed, said, we're out to change the world, and I mean, absolutely did. If you think a world without Esri technology and what they've developed, had a commitment to, and a commitment to public safety over the years. Without it, I think it'd be a far different world of, what we can bring to bear to be effective and and actually, be able to have that real-time intelligence to communicate on the scene. So, earlier I was telling John, I said, one thing I want to do during the course of this is on behalf of public safety to say thank you, because, when you really look at the value of, what we accomplished in partnership with Esri, I think it goes without saying. So,
Well, I appreciate that, Chief. No,
Sure.
thank you very much. That's, yeah.
And so, interestingly enough, it's clear that, this started with schools, but it's not limited to them. And, we talked a little bit about that, but so, looking at that grand scope from the Area 51 kind of perspective, so what other opportunities do you see?
I see a tremendous amount of opportunity, right? When you say change the world, there are a lot of opportunities to truly change the world, right? If you imagine all the buildings that exist in the United States, there's a significant portion of them that would matter to public safety if there were indoor maps. Maybe not a single family residential home, something like that. But the larger the building, the more complex the structure, the better it is to have an indoor map for pre-planning and for situational awareness when you're going into an incident, much less post-incident analysis as well. Imagine if that rough estimate I have heard is anywhere from 20 to 40 million buildings in the United States. Imagine if you had complete coverage of those and you had indoor maps of every single one. They wouldn't have to be highly detailed maps. Not like an airport where they map every location down to the individual USB port at each seat at the gate, so you know where to fix it when there's a problem. We don't really need that level of detail in public safety. We certainly want to acknowledge privacy concerns and just probably map spaces like the room we're in, the floor we're on, the building we're in, so that when something does happen and someone dials 911, for example, we can estimate based on their X and Y and Z location, because that's going to get better and better over time, what room they might be in, what floor they might be on. So imagine I'm in my hotel room. I'm in room 1035 on floor 10 here at the Westin in Indianapolis, right? If I couldn't speak, or I was choosing not to speak, but I had an open line, 911 should be able to get that information, not just in X, Y, and Z, not just the height above ground, but the actual room I'm in, maybe plus or minus room, depending on the accuracy of the X, Y, Z. I truly think we can change the world by mapping all of the structures that matter to public safety, not just here in the US, but across the entire world. So many calls are made to 911 and the 3-digit variants throughout the world for mobile devices, and they have the capability of providing an ever increasingly accurate X and Y and Z. And when you combine that with other partners who are doing things like positioning, timing navigation devices, PNT devices, to augment GPS and satellite-based location determination, as we see that get better and better indoors, we can mash that up with the floor-aware, altitude-aware context of indoor maps to really do some incredible stuff.
And we're seeing, currently we can bring in CAD, and when I say CAD, computer-aided design, or BIM, building information into our into Esri, into GIS, and have it appropriately geolocated on a map, right? So when you're doing your plan approvals, they're often submitting digital plans for you to approve in a fire marshal's office. Well, you can bring those right into your GIS and have that view, a 3D view if you choose to, in your GIS now. You'll see more and more of that, and it'll be easier and easier to complete those kind of workflows. We're also going to see in very short order a much easier method to pull a PDF floor plan map and extrude that to a 3D view if you wish, but certainly to digitize it in a much easier way and at scale, and be able to do that for a large area, multiple buildings, multiple floors. And then the IoT connectivity, the ability to understand what's occurring in the building based on the systems that are there. So we already have building management applications in our stack, but to be able to pull up in front of a structure and know what's the temperature on every floor, what doors have been opened or closed, how many card swipes there have been in certain areas, things like that. That's data that's there that we're not consuming appropriately, but you'll see that again being done more and more with better capabilities.
So what do you see like the relationship? And I know there's a lot being done in relation to this, but for indoor mapping and then like augmented reality sensors that feedback, or let's say when I talked about firefighters in theater, let's say in a high-rise building, where there is a fire, some of that technology kind of intersecting, for like the mapping plus, having a kind of a live component of, whether it's LiDAR, radar, infrared, augmented reality. things
Yeah,
like that.
we have a number of partners working in that space currently. So Esri partners like Ascent and Florian 3AM and others working on that very thing. We could have augmented reality or like a heads up display in your mask as you're moving through a structure and be able to actually see outlines of doorways and things like that. That's certainly a possibility that's being tested. And those are the kind of technologies you're going to see again in short order. And if you're currently working in the fire department, it's probably 5 years out, you're going to have that as a day-to-day capability.
Another one I've heard is simply using that during training exercises.
100%, yes.
Right? So you don't have to actually physically go into the structure, but you can go into it virtually, right?
Yeah, virtually.
And what I love about that is it's all using the same indoor GIS data.
Right.
So if you get grant funding to build maps for K-12 schools, break that out of the silo of tactical response for school safety and imagine all of the other things you could do outside of an active shooter or something else that happens on a really bad day, right? That provides so many manifest benefits throughout public safety and is a great way to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars ultimately. Build it right the first time instead of having to rebuild it time and again.
Yeah.
Oh, imagine the amount of training you can do with, let's say, a virtual reality training program with that sort of mapping capability. Back to real-time intelligence and have that real-time intelligence while you're training.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So, we've talked about a lot about, the history and the commitment. We talked about what you've been able to bring to bear today. So, where are we headed in the next 5 years? How do you see us bringing this all together? And on the horizon line, it's kind of like somebody said yesterday with technology, ready or not, here we come, So.
So very curious to see what you think. What comes to my mind immediately is the hot topic of artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And how can we leverage that indoors to make better decisions, right? Whether or not that's in the heat of the moment of emergency response or planning ahead of time. And there was an interesting use case that might not necessarily require AI to solve just yet, but you can kind of think further through into ways that AI and analysis could leverage indoor GIS data and think about it geospatially. Imagine you have an office complex that has 2 wings, there's 4 stories, but there's 1 AED in that building. Will people know where that AED is in the moment of need? Could you inspect the occupancy of that building throughout time to figure out where are people usually located, on which floors, in which rooms, in which areas, and what would be the best placement of an AED to reduce the amount of time it would take for someone to get to that AED? It's a small use case, right? But you can think of in the future as we have the power of analyzing things so much more quickly. What can we do with that? How can we harness that? Much less trying to predict ahead of time what the nature of an incident might be, what the best evacuation routes might be, et cetera, both indoors and outdoors, given current conditions and anticipated conditions. The sky's really the limit with that. But, Mike, what do you think?
I mean, I'd certainly agree on our development of GeoAI is what we're referring to it as, but artificial intelligence driven geospatial capabilities. And what that's going to do in the short term is ease of use. So you're going to have more and more firefighters, police officers being those citizen developers, and they can develop their own apps simply by asking questions to the AI assistant that's built into the software. It's incredible. So you'll see more and more use like that, just easier access to the technologies. And then, certainly the tracking of personnel to me is still a priority for us, and being able to do that in indoor buildings. We're working internationally with a number of partners, like I mentioned a few, to try to get that done. And that's what I want to see next 3 to 5 years is consistent tracking of personnel inside of structures. That's our goal.
Well, I got to tell you, that's where my passion lies for bringing all this technology together. That's where the rubber meets the road. I think that's where I think it's going to have its greatest impact.
Yes.
There are so many great use cases for this type of technology, but being on the scene where we couldn't locate somebody and they passed away because of smoke inhalation while we talking to them on the radio. It's just we got to the point where hopefully that we get over that hump. It never happens again, and we'll at least reduce that risk dramatically.
Yes.
Because like we said before, the things that the technology we didn't have 30 years ago, and when you kind of looking back and how the acceleration of technology, from 30 years ago, but think in the last 3 years. Just think of AI all of a sudden just emerging. I mean, back home, they're building a $12 billion data center.
Yes.
It's strictly for AI. They have to build its own power substation that would probably power half the city.
Wow.
For that data center. So interesting. But and so indoor mapping is the next frontier in public safety GIS. And would you agree? Of course, I agree. And with FirstNet powering this connection, it's going to change the way we protect our communities. So, any final thoughts, on that? Because I mean, when we talked about Esri sharing the mission, vision, and values of public safety, and how that feels, to us, in public safety, and that's interdisciplinary, of course. It's interdisciplinary interoperability. This week is the week of tomorrow's 9/11, right? So, how was all this? What was it born out of? And it was born out of us recognizing the need that we had these gaps that were huge as far as interoperability amongst disciplines, and the need for that, for unified command, sound decision making, real-time intelligence. So, any final comments on that? As far as just thinking about it in terms of the historic nature of where we're at, in the tomorrow's 9/11.
It's interesting when you mentioned the historic nature, because I assumed I would latch on to technology, right? Like, I once built an AVL system that had to work over 9600 baud modems, where you get the herky-jerky little moving around, right? But where my mind actually went to was partnerships, right? Given the history of Esri, we've been around since 1969. We've always had a very close, tight-knit relationship with public safety, whether or not that's in the vendor community, the users that are out there, the people, the boots on the ground that are using it. And I think throughout the next, say, if you look the next 3 years, right, the conversation we're having today is going to be incredibly different given the technology landscape. But the one constant thing that will remain is the partnership. And that's the connection between the people and the agencies that do this great work. Not long ago, I held a little 90-minute workshop in DuPage County, Illinois, where I live, and we brought together county GIS, school resource officers, fire law, EMS, 911 telecommunicators, basically anybody that could participate in an incident that would involve an indoor map.
Sure.
And we said, if you had access to a GIS-based indoor map that was richly attributed, that could be a place where you're fusing real-time data together, who would need to use it, when, where, why, how, and we just explored that. And the conversation, of course, started off at the K through 12 school safety level, but about not 5 or 10 minutes into it, went straight away to fire incident pre-plans. And
Right.
How can we use this in fire? And it resulted in a working group starting that was cross-discipline to look at 4 different schools, public, private, another public one that might be newer as opposed to older, see what kind of indoor data it has, and then a charter school to see what kind of challenges and benefits they could have along the way, right? It's that coming together to look at what is technically possible now and how can we use it for good, that I think is always going to persist and is going to become even more important as we see such radical shifts in technology.
Yeah, and I'll definitely support that, partnership discussion. And 9/11, I wasn't at Esri at that point. It was in the fire service. I certainly remember that day, obviously. But the stories you hear from our personnel that responded there was really about the silos that were still in place. And that was at a federal level, a state level, a local level. And really, you can leverage GIS, and I see it expanding as another communications platform. Because when we have digital mapping, we have digital indoor plans that I can share. If I can get you a link on your phone, I can show you the map, and we're all operating off the same incident intelligence to perform whatever the object, or to reach the objectives we set for that incident. That's not going to go away. Our support of public safety is certainly not going to go away. And the great work our customers are doing, the public safety agencies that are using GIS, is not going to go away. So I'm very excited for what we're going to see next 3 to 5 years. Then hopefully I'm retiring after that. But no, I want to thank the association for having us this week. It's been a wonderful event, and certainly glad and thankful to partner with FirstNet throughout all this.
Well, I appreciate that. And this ecosystem partnership that exists, and the speed of technology, I think, really is really accentuated by that. The ability of the ecosystem to, kind of our motto, bringing public safety together. And that's all of us. I mean, that's Esri. That's the fire service, law enforcement, emergency management, EMS, public safety communications as a whole. So I want to thank you for that. But So thank you to Brooks Shannon and Mike Cox from Esri for sharing this vision. And to our listeners, stay safe, stay connected, and join us next time on The Future is Now, Public Safety Connected. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.